Okay, I've muted you all. You're welcome to unmute yourselves. If you have any questions, please do stop me if you have a question. That will make the class more interactive and more interesting. Let's start with a quick recap of what we covered yesterday. We are now into the next section of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which deals with business. This is my overview of the entire Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which covers pretty much all of the basic laws of Jewish living Jewish. And within business, we have seven chapters that address many different dimensions. So firstly, we're learning about upright business dealings, and then we'll see that it extends beyond business into general communications and interactions. We'll speak about business with prohibited items, interest, iska, which is a financial setup that avoids interest, and vows and oaths, and finally traveling. But let's get back into chapter 62. Yesterday we learned that it is a mitzvah not to deceive in sales. This mitzvah is called Oina'ah, but we learned a lot about this. We learned that there were two things that I pointed out, and let's take a look at them inside. The first was that the mitzvah is both for the seller and the buyer, which I find quite interesting, which means that the prohibition of deception is not only for the seller not to deceive in showing the item, but it's also for the buyer not to deceive the seller into undercharging him. I mean, deceit is quite a strong word. We learned yesterday that it's not just about where you actually go and try to deceive someone, but it's much more than that. It's that you need to be sure. The second point, which I thought was quite important, is that we need to be there for each other. And in a competitive market where each guy is trying to get the better deal, it's important to remember that the Jewish approach is not where everybody is responsible for themselves and must fend for themselves. Not at all. The Jewish approach is that we need to all look after each other, which means that whether you're the buyer or the seller, you need to be sure that the other party is not being tricked into something. Which means that this I know is not just that you shouldn't deceive him, but more than that, if he might not be aware that he is overpaying or underselling, then you have a requirement. You're not allowed to underpay the seller, and you're not allowed to overcharge the buyer until you've ensured that that buyer or seller is aware of the true value of this item, which is quite a tall order. Easier said than done. So whether you're selling or buying a house or a car, whatever the item is, you want to be sure that both parties are aware of what the true value is, so that they are not underpaying or they are not overpaying or undercharging. That was point number 2. Point number 3, which was also quite important, was that how do you determine the value of an item? So we say that it goes by that time and that place. Okay, and although you might say it's up for grabs, how long is a piece of string? We said that there's a certain bracket that maybe is reasonable, but once it's outside of that bracket, then it means that you're overcharging or you're underpaying, and you would have to ask which moves us to the final, the most important point number 4, which is disclosure. This whole concept where deceit is quite a strong word, but the idea is that you want to be sure not just not to deceive, but you want to be sure that the other party is aware of the true value of the item. That's really what's key. Once you're sure that the other party is aware, then you can charge whatever you want, because you're not forcing him. He could decide whether he wants to pay for it or not. Which leads us to the next point, and that is that there's a different type of transaction. There is a transaction where you say to the other party, let's say you're the seller, you say to the other party that regardless of the true value of the item, I'm willing to disclose how much I paid for it, and you'll see how much money I'm making off it. And it's up to you to decide whether you want to buy it. So one of two things need to be disclosed. Either you need to be sure, you need to disclose the true value of the item. You need to be sure that the buyer or seller is aware of the true value of the item if your price is different from that. Or alternatively, you could disclose what exactly you paid for it. And so then you could, by disclosing, by saying, this is how much I bought it for. Yesterday, we get the example of the iPhone. If I tell them, I bought it for 2,000 Rand and I'm selling it for 2,500 Rand, then whether that iPhone in South Africa right now is worth whatever generation, whether it's worth 1,000 Rand or 4,000 Rand, once I tell them that this is what I paid for it and this is what I'm selling it for, then it's what you're implying is that I don't know the true value and it's up to you to find that out. And then even if the iPhone is only worth 1,000 Rand, you would be able to sell it for 2 because you've said that this is a different type of sale. This is a sale of disclosing my costs, and that's what's determining the sale. But if you're not willing to tell if I'm selling this iPhone and I don't want to tell the person how much I bought it for, and I want to sell it for 2,000 Rand, when I know that on Takealot you could get that same price, that same device for 1,500, and it has a pretty much standard value of 1,500, then I would need to disclose to the buyer and say, look, you know, the value of this iPhone might only be 1,500, but I'm only willing to sell it for 2,000. So it's your choice. Do you want to spend 500 and get it from me because whatever, you trust me or whatever other reason, it's convenient, I'll deliver it, you don't need to deal with any online transactions, or not. So as long as I can't say that he needs to find out what it's going for, I need to be sure that he's aware as well, which, as I said, is easier said than done. Any questions? Okay, let's move on to halacha number 4. This is another really important halacha. Misleading enhancements. Okay, if a person has something to sell, he's forbidden to make it look better than it really is in order to mislead the buyer. What are examples of this? So back in the day when the industry was large on selling animals, today it also is, but not for most of us. A person would give an animal bran water to drink. Excuse me. There's another concern here as well of cruelty to animals, but we're talking from a monetary perspective. The person would give bran water to the animal to drink, which would make the animal swell up and make its hair stand up so that it appears fatter and healthier. Looks like it's a gesundte behavior. Or if a person put a fresh coat of paint onto old utensils to make them look like they're actually new. All of this is forbidden. So let's clarify over here. Let's talk about paints. If I want to sell my car and I decide that I'll get better value if I send it to, if I take it for a paint so it looks like it's brand new, nothing wrong with that because cars are often repainted. What we're speaking about over here is where you are deceiving the buyer into thinking that it's an actual new item when it's not. So back to the car. If the car had been used, but I tried to say that it's brand new, I guess you wouldn't manage to do that with the car, but with another item. If you say that it's brand new, it hasn't been touched, and it has, that's lying. But even if you don't say anything, if you make an enhancement to an item that gives the buyer the impression that the item is more valuable than it really is, and that is ida'ah. That is not upright, and it is forbidden. It is part of Torah's prohibition. The practical example: if you're selling a house and you have a problem with mold or a leak, for that matter, so it's going to cost you to actually get rid of the mold or to actually get rid of the leak will cost you 10 grand. So just before you sell the house, instead of spending the 10 grand, you pay 1 grand to have a nice paint job, so the person would never know that there's any leak. And then you sell the house. That's obviously forbidden because the buyer, you've just done something to make the buyer think that the house is something that it's not. Other examples, moving on to halacha number 5. It is forbidden to mix a little bad fruit with a little bit of good fruit and to sell all of them as good fruit, or to mix a low-grade beverage with a better grade. Okay, so quite a practical example. You go to the supermarket and you buy a little little carton of strawberries or tomatoes, and it's looking wonderful on top. And then you open the packet, and in row number 2, you see that it's not quite the same. As a seller, that's forbidden. As a seller, you're not allowed to disguise, to make the carton look like everything that's in the carton is better by making the top row look good where underneath what's there is not as good. Or beverages of different ages. But if the person, you're giving them the option to taste it and he will be able to taste the difference, then that's fine, because that's a form of disclosure. If you letting him taste the item and he'll be able to pick it up, then it's been disclosed. He'll be able to see that this is not of the same quality as far as beverages are concerned. Okay, before we move on to the next point, just another interesting discussion that exists in the original Shulchan Aruch is like this. So you buy, maybe it goes on a little bit more when we said pay. Yeah, it goes on the earlier point when we said selling by disclosing how much you paid. Okay, so you buy yourself wholesale. Can't think of the spot of examples, but let's say you buy 100 bamboos. Okay, 100 pieces of bamboo, and now you want to sell those 100 pieces of bamboo, either in a set of 100 or 50 or 10. So you say to the buyer, look, I don't know what the going value is, but this is how much I paid, and this is how much I'm willing to sell it for. So you bought the 100 bamboos for 1,000 rand, and you tell them, look, it cost me 10 rand a piece. I got it wholesale. I'm willing to sell you 10 bamboos, not for 100 rand, but for 120. That's fine, right? But that's provided that you don't first find the best pieces and take them out to sell them individually. So I'm sure there's very practical applications of this. I can't think of them right now. Bamboo is not that practical. But if you're buying in bulk, and you tell the person what you paid and how much you're making, but you don't tell them that you've taken out the good ones to sell them separately, then that would be another form of deceit that is spoken about in the Shulchan Aruch. Back to the text. Halacha number 6. A shopkeeper is allowed to distribute roasted kernels and nuts to children to get them into the habit of buying from him, prizes and discounts. He may also sell below the market price to attract customers, and the other merchants cannot prevent him from doing so. This is not deceitful. You're not deceiving the buyer. You're incentivizing the buyer. And that's fine. So when we launched this chapter, we spoke about the very fine line between marketing and deceit. The key is, are you incentivizing the person or are you misleading the person? If it's an incentive, that's fine. But if in some way you're misleading the other party, then that is deceitful. And as we said, misleading means giving him an impression that what he's getting is different from what he's really getting, even if it's not actively, even if it's just passively. But the principle is that we need to call Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. We're all there for each other, and therefore we cannot, in this competitive business, we cannot just fend for ourselves. We need to also look out for each other. Now, does that take away bargaining? Not at all, because bargaining is not. Depends how you bargain, right? So if you're going to the shuk and the seller says that no, this is these things they're worth 200 rand, and this pack of almonds, of cashews, and you're like, no, it's only worth 50. So then that's a problem, because If it's only worth 100 and the guy's saying it's worth 200, then that's misleading. And if you're saying they're only worth 50 when they're worth 100, that's misleading. There is somewhat of a bracket of a standard price of any item in that particular time and place. There's the gray area, but there is also what's clear. But if you're not arguing about what it's really worth, if the buyer is saying that, look, I don't really, whatever else the argument is, if you bargain on another basis, I only have 50 rand to spend today. That's what I've allocated. That's it. Take it. That's fine. The seller says, no, I have to bring in this amount. That's fine. You could bargain and you could fight with each other as long as there is that disclosure. Back to the text. Okay. Anyone who gives short measures or weights, even to a non-Jew, okay, there's no double standards over here, transgresses another negative commandment, which is, do not falsify measurements, whether it's a measurement of length, of weight, of volume, and the punishment for giving short measures and weights is very severe. And why? Because it's impossible for a person to give short measures or weights to properly do teshuvah because he doesn't know exactly how much of a loss he caused people to have. Even if he dedicates his life to communal affairs, it's not considered complete teshuvah. So that's a very severe one. You certainly don't want to have a scale in your house that's not accurate in your business in any form, because that is a terrible sin. Okay, now that said, this moves on to another interesting one. Okay, when you go to the market, when you go to Machane Yehuda Shuk or any market, and they do measure up, you want to maybe get some paprika or some harif, some kind of spice, some pilpulin, some peppers, and they scoop it up, and it goes by scoop. So how do you measure that scoop? Is it flat on top? Is it rounded? So that's determined by the locale. It determines, well, what's the standard practice of that place. But that said, you should rather be more on the generous side. So if you're charging, let's say ice cream scoops, and you're selling ice cream scoops, and really legally a scoop is exactly whatever it is, 50 mils of ice cream, then rather be on the generous side and give a little bit more than on the weaker side. Let's see that inside. So don't have two different weights, one large and one small. Don't keep in your house two different measures, one large and one small. You must have a full just weight. You must have a full just measure. These are all verses from the Torah that speak about the importance of being straight in your weights and measures. Now your bag, your house, seem extra. The rabbis learned from this that it actually will affect your income. You can read it differently. You shall have no money in your bag is not just a commandment that don't do it. It's saying if you do it, then you'll be left without the money. It's actually going to cause poverty because you had different weights. You shall lack the necessities of life in your house. Why? Because you had different measures. So as you'll see in the text, on the other hand, what should a man do to become rich? He should conduct his business honestly and ask for compassion from the one to whom riches belong. As it says, mine is the silver and mine is the gold. Ultimately, it all comes from Hashem. So, moving on to halacha number 9, I just mentioned it. I see we're at 5:20, but just to quickly see it inside. So, rather be more on the generous side than on the short side. So, when you are going by weight, rather give a little more than a little bit less. And halacha number 10. We'll take a look at, please God, tomorrow. We'll conclude this discussion about weights, and then we'll move on to if you grab somebody else's sale, or you retract from a sale, or who gets precedence of sale, all very important halachas. Thank you so much for joining. Wishing you